Hi, I'm Arthur, and in the 41st millennia, there is one thing that is certain. People get sick a lot. The medical treatments on each planet tend to vary between medieval, here's a bottle of whiskey and a rawhide chewy to bite down on, now get on the amputation table, all the way up to literal magic cancer cures found on utopian societies that get beset by wolves. So that would mean that on the higher end of the scale, you'd find it weirdly hard to really get sick, or at least be sick for an extended period of time. And you'd be wrong, but I don't blame you. The diseases of the 40k setting are unironically just some wacky damn nonsense. They are completely insane, and we're gonna talk about some of the worst, and then end off with what is considered unequivocally the worst disease of the setting. So, when talking about diseases, there is a lot to discuss, but the first thing we kinda have to get out of the way is that the god Nurgle is responsible for, the worst of the worst. He is the god of death, plague, and rebirth usually means more disease or tiny bugs, or being turned into a literal bug. But there is one disease that gets an honorable mention, and that is that one time some dude in Kamara, the Dark Eldar city, had his lab raided by people who were jealous as to how well he could make screaming and terror glass sculptures, only to find out that he actually made a disease that was so infectious and so dangerous that it had a 100% mortality rate, and it was the glass plague, and it turned any organic thing into glass that it infected, and it spread a lot. Airborne, in fact. The fun bit is that it actually gave the Dark Eldar true death, meaning even if they had clone vats ready from some homunculus, if they got infected, they weren't coming back, meaning they got eaten by Slaanesh. They eventually contained the plague, and one of the homunculus cults ended up capturing the virus, turning it into a weapon of some sort. But it's still a fun idea to know that Nurgle is not the only one out there able to make a fucked up disease. So, to the actual list of non-alien pathogens, we start kinda low on the list, as it's more of a meme virus. And that's not including the actual meme virus, which I burst out laughing at the name of when I was researching this video. The Ferric Blight. This one is not as deadly as other Nurgle diseases, but it has a very fun effect. So, fun fact, when I started Death Guard in 40k 8th edition, which is one of my first factions, I played a sub-faction known as the Pallid Hand, which are the Death Guard Plague Vectorum that use the Ferric Blight. So what does it do? It's a disease that specifically eats away at metal, which is not an impossible thing. Diseases and animals in our world like that kind of exist. They basically cause all metal to flake off in rusted red sheets. It's dangerous not because it can kill you, it's dangerous because the people who use it still have their armor functional as well as fucking bolt guns. The funniest fact about the Ferric Blight is it's currently wiping out an entire Necron dynasty. The Novak dynasty was infected with the disease, and it looks like the Necrodermis is actually able to be eaten away. So yeah, fuck you Necron fanboys who think the only reason the Necron haven't won yet is because they just don't care to, ya fucking losers. The next one is kinda new and kind of fun. You remember when they were releasing a bunch of specific kill team boxes with named teams that got specific plastic kits and so on and so forth? Yeah, remember the GellarPox infected? They were really cool, right? Well, the GellarPox is kind of an interesting disease to look at, as it's one of the newer and more insidious inventions of Nurgle. Chaos is often kept at bay to some degree by the Gellar field of any void ship, but each individual Chaos god has kind of a way to get past it if they really, really wanted to. I know with Slaanesh they have these weird fucking demons that can possess people and go through Gellar fields, but they're super, super rare. Then you have weirder warp entities like void worms that can sacrifice en masse themselves to possess individual bodies with one of them. But with Nurgle, you have the simple GellarPox, which is a lot worse, in my opinion, just because of how fucking horrible it is. It's a disease that infects people who specifically work around Gellar field reactors. It's pretty fucking gnarly. Essentially, it slowly starts to change how you think about the reactor, and see it more as just a machine / an extension of yourselves, rather than just some holy device keeping you from dying a horrible death. It invades your dreams, it invades your intrusive thoughts. Eventually it leads them to intentionally sabotaging the reactor by taking away any kind of holy warding thing that keeps demons from touching it, which you might think is the end point, destroying the reactor and then just dying to some warp-born monstrosity, but no, it actually gets worse. Because if you've ever seen the movie Virus, you know, the one with Jamie Lee Curtis, when Jamie Lee Curtis was supposed to be on a hiatus from movies, but she appeared in like 2. Yeah, that happens. People would start to actually melt into the reactor and steal parts of said reactor to put into themselves, turning into some fucking Cronenberg monstrosity of metal and flesh. It's likely this way because it's hard to repair a reactor if it's destroyed. It's harder to repair if it's covered in people that have fused to the metal, bone, and flesh alike. Usually, you just have to burn the whole thing and get a new ship. Next up is one of the more commonly known diseases, and that is the Walking Pox. Now, this one has gotten a lot of coverage as, for one, it was the center stage disease for a while for Warhammer 8th edition, and it is the main disease in Warhammer 40k Darktide, so if you'd played that game, you'll kind of recognize what it is. And before you say anything, if you don't know too much about the disease, I'll let you know this. It's a lot worse than you think. Basically, from a top-down perspective, it functions like any other zombie virus, with a few small traits that are different. One, they tend to get these bony, almost tree-like growths across their body. Two, they, for some reason, always have a rictus grin of some sort. And 3, the one that will likely cause you to have a bout of existential anxiety, they are still 100% conscious of their actions, they just don't have control of them. See, the Walking Pox will actually kill the host's body and ravage it to be what it is, but the mind, or perhaps the soul of the person inside the body still sticks around with a decent degree of clarity, while the zombified body will roam around looking for people to infect and more meat to eat. It's kind of horrifying to think about, but if you read something like The Lords of Silence, you get a first-person perspective as to what happens when infected with the Walking Pox. It's pretty fucking scary. Speaking of pretty fucking scary, we are covering Nurgle's most dangerous creation, Nurgles Rot. Nurgles Rot is a weird disease because when it comes to all of Nurgle's diseases, it is a partially warp-based disease and partially a real virus, but with the rot itself, it is actually like 80% warp-borne. Described as mostly incurable, it afflicts the person's body with a lot of non-standard symptoms. Like, the whole point of the disease is it's a psychic, magical, hoo-ha disease that will cause a bunch of weird-ass symptoms to manifest, and no one will ever have the same ones. So you have one guy over here exploding into cancer, and you have another guy over here that is exploding into worms for some reason. The fun part about the rot is, as I mentioned, it is a mostly warp-based disease that corrupts the soul as well as the body. If you are infected and you are not placed near a bunch of blanks and nullification fields, as well as a bunch of very talented doctors, your soul will manifest a kind of dark reflection in the Garden of Nurgle. A seed will appear on a tree that grows ripe with the corruption and destruction of your soul, slowly transferring your spirit to Nurgle's garden, and once you finally pass from the disease, the seed drops and hatches into a newfound plague bearer, or in some rarer cases, it turns into a harbinger. Though, again, these are a non-standard set of diseases. Essentially, you don't always have to have the seed thing happening. Sometimes the person just turns into a plague bearer in real space, which is just a demon. Which, now that I think about it, wouldn't that just be another form of apotheosis, the same as a demon prince? Or is the plague bearer not even them anymore? It's just a plague bearer born from the sickness that they felt. These are the things that I think about at night that kind of keep me up late. Speaking of, I know Nurgle's Rot is the most dangerous creation of Nurgle, but what if I told you one of Nurgle's subordinates created a disease even worse? In the trilogy of the Dark Imperium, which is one of the better series if you want to get introduced to the setting, Kugath, the most favored of Nurgle's demons, is attempting to create the greatest disease that will ever exist. Basically, he ended up eating one of Nurgle's best diseases in order to create himself. As like a Nurgling, he drank all of Nurgle's best creation, and now he's a great unclean one. So now he wants to repay Nurgle. So he wants to make something so dangerous and something so potent that he desires it above all else in order to redeem himself. But he needs some ingredients so rare that it is almost impossible to get. He needs a drop of untainted Primarch blood, which in the second book, he gets a few drops of Guilliman's blood through a very lucky strike, and thus the greatest and most dangerous, most unholy of all diseases was born, naming it the God Blight. A disease so dangerous that even Nurgle demons cannot touch it without dying. Kugath tested this disease, and it not only killed a bunch of Nurglings, but it destroyed their souls. Like, the energy did not go back to Nurgle, it was erased from existence. They popped, and thus were no more. It was a disease that didn't just remove someone from the physical world, but it removed them from the metaphysical world as well. The disease ended up infecting Guilliman in his final battle with Mortarion, and due to his infection, it almost killed him. The description was it wasn't like he was being covered in like cancers or sores or lesions or worms. He was being eaten from the inside. His soul was being devoured. His skin turned black, his veins bulged silver white, and his eyes were rotting away to the point where he looked like an almost skeletal husk, as the very force of life that could keep him alive was being taken and destroyed. It was a disease created to be semi-sentient. What I mean by this is it was aware of itself, and it had its own wants and hunger, and the only thing that it wanted was to infect and destroy all life, even other demons. And the only thing that kept it from doing that was intervention from the Emperor of Mankind himself. The Emperor possessed Guilliman and filled his body with the holy spirit of "fuck you, Mortarion, you think you're safe, I'll get you, bitch," and thus the God Blight was destroyed, thank fuck. But the problem here is that I do believe by the end of the book, Kugath, although he was defeated and banished back to the warp, still had a few drops of Guilliman's blood. So, with enough time and effort, he might be able to recreate the Blight once again in the future. But that is a story yet to be told. And these are the worst diseases that exist in the 40k setting. I think there are a lot of different ones that are pretty bad. Parasite infections are pretty rough, but I don't really count those to some degree. I know the Tattle Slug is fucking rancid, but it can only infect one person at a time, which is kind of shitty. And I know there are other diseases like the Droning and so on and so forth that have like very gruesome effects, but we're talking lethality and disturbing. Nurgles Rot and the God Blight are kind of at the top of the list no matter how you shake it. What diseases of these do you think are the worst? And do you think I was wrong about the God Blight being the worst? Let me know in the comments down below what you think about the different diseases that you can see in these, settings. Also, alongside that, remember to like and subscribe as it helps the channel, and special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. If you want to support me as well as gain access to additional content, then become a channel member today. Thanks again for watching, and till next time.